A daughter kneels beside trays of silkworms, feeding them mulberry leaves by lamplight. The room smells of leaf and warm dust. Outside, millet fields stretch toward a horizon marked by a wall that bends and breaks more than it stands. Somewhere past that wall, riders cross freely, and somewhere past them, a road runs west toward a city she will never see. She will spend half a year at this work, and the thread she winds will become tax, salary, and payment long before it becomes anyone's garment. This is the empire of the Han. It rose at the same time as Rome and grew to nearly the same size. 2 of every 3 people alive answered to one of these 2 courts. But where Rome built its order from law and citizenship, Han China built its from family, ritual, and a debt owed to the dead. Its officials rose through recommendation, not examination. Its frontier was held less by conquest than by marriage, silk, and patience. The 2 empires knew of each other by name, yet were kept apart by men who profited from the distance between them. If you find this kind of patient, immersive exploration meaningful, a like and a subscription help the next story get made. Sharing with a single person who thinks this way is the most powerful thing you can do. Let your hands unclench wherever they are resting. Let your breathing slow to match the pace of a household at dusk. And allow the evening to settle as we step into a world built on entirely different ideas. This is Han China, the other empire. An iron blade cuts into dry soil, and behind it a wooden frame drags 3 furrows in a single line. Seed drops from a hopper above, falling in an even measure no human hand could match by scattering. A second attachment folds the loosened earth back over the row, and a weighted board presses it flat before the ox has taken its next step. One pass of this machine does what 4 separate motions once required. Across the fields of Han China, this tool works roughly 10 times faster than the hand casting still practiced elsewhere. In the fields of Rome, on the far side of the world, sowing is still a matter of scattering and hoping. The gain is not only in speed. Seed placed in a straight, covered row survives wind and birds that would have taken a third of what was scattered loose. What used to be a gamble, thrown across the soil and left to chance, becomes something closer to a calculation. A harvest multiplies, and grain that was never earned before now fills a storehouse. That surplus feeds soldiers who grow nothing themselves. It feeds clerks who spend their days at a writing desk instead of a field. It will matter more than anyone walking behind this plough could yet imagine. Not far off, a single man pushes a loaded cart along a raised path between the fields. Its wheel sits at the very center of the frame, not out in front the way a cart's wheel is built elsewhere. The weight of the grain and tools he carries rests almost entirely on that center wheel, not on his own back and arms. One man alone moves a load that would otherwise need 2 or 3 others straining beside him, or an ox pulling behind. A tomb wall painted in the city of Chengdu shows this same cart in careful detail. It was finished in the year 118 of the Common Era. The wheel sits centered, the frame low, a single figure guiding it forward. It is the earliest picture of its kind that survives. In the country later called Europe, this same design will not appear for nearly 1,000 years. It sits unused on one side of the world, while laborers there strain under loads a single wheel, mounted the right way, could have carried. A useful idea does not travel simply because it exists. It waits for a road to carry it, and here that road has not yet been built. Inside a low workshop, a furnace glows with a heat no simple hearth fire could reach. Bellows push air through the coals until the flame turns from orange to something closer to white. Raw ore softens inside that heat and runs molten, poured out as cast iron, brittle and quick to shatter if struck the wrong way. But heated again, more slowly this time, and cooled with patience rather than haste, that same brittle iron loses its fault lines. It bends instead of breaking. This second heating was already an old technique by the time the Han inherited it. It turns a fragile metal into something that can be shaped, sharpened, and trusted. What comes out of these furnaces does not stay locked inside palace walls or army arsenals. It turns up in a farmer's kitchen as a paring knife and in a widow's sewing basket as a needle. It turns up in a cook's hand as a pair of tweezers, pulling a fishbone free. A three-legged cooking stand was once carved from stone or cast in bronze for those who could afford it. Now it sits over an ordinary hearth fire in iron, unremarkable everywhere. Two cities anchor this world at its widest edges, and neither looks quite like the other. Chang'an, capital of the earlier Han court, spreads across some 36 square kilometers of walled ground. Something near 250,000 people move through its markets and lanes, its avenues wide enough for a household's cart to pass another without slowing. Later, when the capital shifts east to Luoyang, the city that rises there holds nearly twice as many people, close to 500,000. Yet its walls enclose barely 2/3 of the space Chang'an once filled. The same number of steps once carried a resident of Chang'an from one quiet quarter to the next. Now those steps carry a resident of Luoyang through twice the crowd. The streets grow tighter. The rooftops crowd closer together, courtyard against courtyard, with less room between one household's wall and the next. There is less room for a cart to turn, less room for a voice to travel before another voice answers it. A city that was once spread wide across the land has, within a few generations, folded in on itself. Denser, louder, more people packed into less ground than the dynasty had ever asked a capital to hold before. In the year 117 before the Common Era, the court claims the salt pans and the iron foundries as its own. War against the riders of the northern steppe drains the treasury faster than land taxes can refill it. Salt and iron are the two goods no household can live without. Every cooking pot needs salt to preserve meat through winter. Every plough, every axle, every blade traces back to the same foundries the throne now controls. The policy will not hold its shape. It is dropped when the war quiets and the complaints grow loud, revived when the treasury empties again, dropped a second time, revived once more. It is a lever pulled and released for generations, depending on how badly the wars are costing that year. In the year 81 before the Common Era, under a new emperor, officials gather at court to argue the question aloud. A scribe records what each side says. Men who favor the state monopoly insist the frontier garrisons cannot be fed without it. Left alone, they argue, private merchants would grow wealthy enough to rival the throne itself. Scholars trained in the old Confucian texts answer that a government has no business competing with its own people for profit. Their sharpest complaint is not philosophical at all. State foundries, they say, rush to meet a quota, and the iron tools that come out of them are brittle. They crack in a farmer's hand within a season, worse than what a small village smith once shaped by hand for the same coin. Nobody in the room has a clean answer to that complaint, not even the men defending the monopoly. They can only say that a large workshop distributes tools more evenly than 100 scattered ones ever could. 15 years before the Common Era, a court official named Yang Xiong sits down to compile a dictionary of regional speech. It is the kind of book meant to preserve words a traveler might not otherwise understand, dialect by dialect, region by region. A phrase spoken in one province should not vanish unrecorded in another. Inside its pages, almost as an aside, he describes a wheel and belt fitted to a machine for winding silk fiber onto a weaver's spool. It is the first time anyone has written such a mechanism down. A craftsman's device slipped quietly into a book meant for words rather than tools. The belt turns, the spool turns with it, and thread that once had to be wound by a patient hand now winds itself. It is a small motion inside a large industry, quietly carried forward into every wheel that will later spin thread the same way. That motion outlasts the dictionary that first noted it down, remembered now only by the historians still reading it. In the year 132 of the Common Era, the scholar Zhang Heng presents the court with a bronze vessel taller than a person. 8 dragons ring its rim, each one facing a different direction. Each dragon holds a ball loosely in its jaws, poised above the open mouth of a bronze toad crouched beneath it. Hidden inside the urn, a pendulum waits, balanced and still until the earth itself moves. When a tremor reaches the vessel from any direction, the pendulum swings toward it and trips a lever. One dragon alone releases its ball into the toad below, with a note that carries through the hall. Months later, word arrives that the ground shook far to the west, in Gansu, a distance no rider could cross in less than several days. The court already knows. The dragon facing west had already dropped its bull, days before any messenger reached the capital on horseback. In a court where a shaking earth is read as heaven's own displeasure, being the first to know is its own kind of power. Almost nothing built of Han wood still stands. The halls, the beams, the roof tiles, all of it settled back into the ground centuries ago, leaving historians very little to look at directly. What survives instead are the clay models buried alongside the dead, small versions of the houses the living once knew. They were built to keep the departed comfortable in a world assumed to mirror this one. In Henan, archaeologists have lifted 6-foot manor houses out of the soil, 7 stories of glazed terracotta. Each floor carries its own overhanging balcony and its own row of teardrop windows. Brackets support the roofline the way real timber once did. A green glaze colored with copper coats every tile, fired centuries ago and still catching light the way it must have when it left the kiln. Nobody built these for the living to admire. They were sealed underground, meant only for eyes that would never open again. Yet they are the clearest picture anyone now has of how a Han household actually looked. Royalty receives a different kind of covering. For an emperor's kin, death does not simply arrive. The body is dressed first in an armor made entirely of jade, thousands of small pieces. Some are cut into rectangles, some into triangles, some fanned like a leaf. Each piece is shaped by a craftsman who will spend a career on work like this and see only a handful of finished suits. Gold thread stitches the largest pieces together for the highest rank. Silver serves those slightly below. Bronze below that, a hierarchy of metal running as strictly as any hierarchy of office. As many as 2,500 pieces make up a single suit, wrapping a body from head to foot in stone. The stone was believed to hold the soul's essence inside it, keeping it from scattering once breath has left the body. An entire craft exists for no other purpose than this. Generation after generation of hands are trained to armor the dead in something that will never see daylight again. The story told for centuries credits a court eunuch named Kai Lun with a single moment of invention. In the year 105 of the Common Era, the account goes, he gathers mulberry bark and hemp scraps. He adds worn cloth and the ruined webbing of old fishing nets. He pulps all of it together and lets it soften in water until the fibers separate and blend. Then he lifts a thin, even layer of that pulp on a woven screen of reed. He tilts it gently so the water drains and the fibers settle flat. Left in the sun, the sheet dries into something light enough to carry, cheap enough for anyone to use. It is nothing like the heavy bamboo slips or costly silk that came before it. For centuries, this has stood as the moment paper began. The ground itself tells a different story. In Gansu, at a place called Fangmatan, diggers in the year 1986 uncovered a scrap of hemp paper carrying part of a map. It was buried more than a century before Kai Lun was ever born. Near Xi'an, at Baqiao, a fragment of plant fiber paper turned up in 1957, stuck to the back of a bronze mirror. It was dated no later than 118 years before the Common Era. More fragments surfaced afterward at Dunhuang and at Yumen Pass, each one older than the official account allows. Defenders of the traditional story call these early sheets something less than true paper. They describe a rougher cousin, closer to beaten bark cloth than to a properly pulped sheet. One government institute has gone so far as to call Kai Lun's invention a settled question, closed to further argument. A historian named Pan Jixing looked at the Baqiao and Fangmatan fragments under a microscope and found something else. He found the same steps a papermaker would still recognize today: cutting, soaking, spreading a layer across a screen until it holds its own shape. What the evidence points toward is not a single man inventing paper from nothing. It suggests a slower craft, already alive in scattered workshops. Kai Lun later gathered it, refined it, and gave it a shape simple enough for an empire of clerks to use every day. A sheet of paper lifts, dripping from a screen of woven reed. Somewhere in a scattered workshop, decades before any court eunuch is given credit for it, the sheet is already there. It is already older than the story that will one day be told about its birth. A household shrine glows at dusk, incense still climbing in a thin line for the dead. The names carved into the tablets belong to grandparents, and their grandparents before them. Each one is owed a bowl of rice, a cup of wine, a few words spoken aloud so the dead do not go hungry or forgotten. Across the empire that year, the count comes in at 59,594,979 people. They are spread across more than 12 million households, each running some version of this same small fire at dusk. Modern scholars trust that number with unusual confidence. It amounts to something close to 27 people out of every 100 alive anywhere on Earth that year. More than 1 in 4 human beings breathing were Han subjects, and every one of them belonged to a household exactly like this one. That household is not a private matter, set apart from the business of governing an empire. A scholar named Dong Zhongshu spent his life arguing the opposite. He was born in the year 179 before the Common Era and died in the year 104. He welded the old moral teachings of Confucius to an older cosmology of heaven and earth until the two could no longer be pulled apart. This was not simple borrowing. It was a fusion built with intention, joining ethics to the movements of the sky itself. Under his fusion, a ruler's own character stops being a private virtue and becomes a public force. Kindness in the palace is believed to settle the world into harmony. Cruelty or neglect there is believed to unbalance heaven itself, the way a crack in a single beam can shift the weight of an entire roof. Bad rule on this account was never only bad policy. It was treated as a disturbance in the order of the universe, a theological stake placed directly on the emperor's own temperament. The household, scaled upward, became the state's working model for what order was supposed to look like. The mechanism that carries this belief out of the shrine and into the palace is a simple, deliberate mapping. A son kneels before his living father, offering the same reverence owed to the dead. He is asked to feel that exact posture again when he stands before the emperor. It is not treated as a metaphor. It is built to function as training. This was never incidental moralizing, tucked into the household as an afterthought. It was the load-bearing wire running through the entire structure of the state, the single connection everything else was strung from. A child raised inside a household where a father's word settles every question grows into an adult who already knows how to receive an emperor's word. He carries the posture in his own body without ever being taught the lesson twice. The state did not need to manufacture obedience from nothing, through law alone or through soldiers stationed at every door. It only needed the household to keep doing what households already did, conditioning each new generation from childhood into accepting authority that ran straight downward, unquestioned. The posture would carry itself forward on its own, generation after generation, all the way into the throne room. Filial devotion does not end when a parent dies. The tablets on the shrine are proof of that, kept lit long after the funeral has passed and the mourning clothes have been folded away. A family's central ongoing duty is an unbroken line, sons following fathers back through the dead in a chain that is never allowed to break. Sacrifices are offered to ancestors who are understood to still be present, still owed food and wine and attention. This was never a symbolic gesture reserved for a single day of ritual. It was counted as the primary obligation of the living, renewed every season. It folded the dead permanently into the household's daily accounting of what it owed, and to whom. The same incense rising at dusk over 12 million households was, in that sense, the empire quietly renewing its own foundation, one family at a time. No man in Han China ever sat for an exam to earn his post. That picture belongs to a much later age. The standardized written testing of the Song and Ming dynasties centuries still unborn. What existed instead was called chaju, investigation and recommendation, and it ran on something closer to reputation than to any measurable score. A man rose because his neighbors, his local officials, and the gossip of his own commandery had already decided he was worth rising. Reputation of that kind can be built. Wealth buys it, connections spread it, a family's standing in a market town shapes it long before a single official ever writes a name down. A blind test cannot be bought in quite the same way, and the difference would matter enormously for who was allowed to climb. The system took its formal shape in the year 134 before the Common Era. Emperor Wu issued an edict that every commandery and kingdom send a quota of candidates to the capital. Before that edict, the young dynasty had leaned on hereditary titles and military appointments to staff itself. A sprawling farming empire simply could not run competently on inherited rank and battlefield promotions alone. Its territory and its administrative needs had grown far past what a founding generation of soldiers and their sons could fill. The edict answered a real shortage with a new supply of names. Its leading category was called Shaolian, a word built from filial and incorruptible fused together. Beside it sat smaller, rarer tracks reserved for other kinds of men. Worthies were chosen for wisdom, experts for the classics, and a few simply for possessing the way. Each track opened its own narrow door into the same growing bureaucracy. Local administrators were the ones who went looking. Their task was to name men whose devotion to parents was already spoken of, openly and often. The same was true of their honesty with money, known across the towns where they lived. Nomination followed a reputation already built. It never created one from nothing. To keep the flow of names from overwhelming the capital, quotas held the pipeline in check. It started at one filial candidate and one incorrupt candidate per commandery each year. Emperor He later reshaped that quota around population instead. One nominee was allowed for every 200,000 people in the settled interior, against only one for every 100,000 along the frontier. A man on the frontier had, in effect, twice the chance of being noticed. It was a quiet incentive, folded into the arithmetic of empire, meant to draw distant regions closer to the throne. It made office feel reachable in places still only loosely bound to the capital's authority. Being named was only the beginning. A nominee still had to travel to the capital and spend a full year on probation as a gentleman in attendance inside the palace itself. He stood the night watch and learned the small rituals of court behavior. The entire time, officials watched him, still undecided whether he deserved a post. Only after surviving that year did real responsibility follow, a position as a census attendant, perhaps, or magistrate over a district. The system did not let the man who vouched for him walk away clean either. If a nominee was later caught in corruption or simple incompetence, the official who had recommended him faced demotion of his own. It was a built-in stake meant to keep local men from putting forward names too lightly. It gave the man who vouched for a candidate a real reason to vouch honestly, rather than out of favor or friendship. 50 students gather in a new academy in the year 124 before the Common Era. They are sent there to study the 5 classics under a system still learning what it wants to become. People would later mistake the Taishu for something like an examination hall, a place where merit alone decided who belonged. It was never that, and it was never open to anyone who simply wished to compete for a seat. It was a training ground for men already moving through the recommendation pipeline, a school built to finish what local reputation had already started. Its size alone tells the rest of the story. 50 disciple students at the founding grew to 3,000 by the late Western Han. By the 2nd century of the Common Era, under the Eastern Han, the number reached an estimated 30,000. It was a 600-fold expansion, tracing the bureaucracy's own hunger for credentialed men. In this room of 50, the system is still young enough to believe reputation and merit are the same thing. The recommendation system is barely a generation old, and already it is being quietly bought. A commandery administrator sits with a list of names. These are men whose reputations for filial devotion and financial honesty are supposed to have already been earned in the villages around them. But reputation, it turns out, is not a fixed thing that either exists or does not. It can be built. It can be purchased, a little at a time, through gifts to the right households and favors extended to the right neighbors. The families who can afford to cultivate a son's public image are the families who had land and standing already. They can spare a boy from the fields long enough to be educated and praised. Nothing about Shaolian nomination was designed to test a man against a stranger's fixed measure. It measured only what the people around him already believed, and belief could be arranged. By the time the Eastern Han is underway, this has hardened past mere advantage into something closer to habit. Local magnates trade Shaolian slots for their own relatives, the way a family might trade grain or livestock. The men who appraise reputation for a living find themselves leaned on, bribed, or simply outranked by the households whose sons need placing. Central oversight, the whole elaborate machinery of nomination quotas and probationary years, becomes something to root around rather than satisfy. A bureaucracy meant to reward incorruptibility fills instead with men whose only proven qualification is the size of their family's name. One man tries to stop it. In the year 132 of the Common Era, the director of the Imperial Secretariat looks at what the recommendation system has become. His name is Zuo Xiong, and his fix sounds almost obvious in hindsight. Candidates for Shaolian, he rules, must be at least 40 years old. Their household finances and social standing must be checked, not simply asserted. The logic is plain enough. A boy of 19 with a well-connected father is not the incorruptible elder the system was built to find. A background check might catch what a village's flattering consensus would not. For a while, it slows the drift. It does not reverse it. When the Han dynasty finally collapses, in the year 220, the powerful clans stop hiding what they have been doing all along. They replace the recommendation system with something called the 9-rank system. It ranks candidates by family pedigree openly, without the old pretense of virtue or local acclaim. A contemporary critic sums up where this leaves the empire in a single blunt line. The upper ranks lack men of humble origin, while the lower ranks lack men of noble family. A system built to find worth wherever it happened to grow has arrived by the most direct possible route at hereditary caste. The Han built its entire social order on 4 kinds of work, ranked from most honored to most despised. Scholar officials sit at the top, prized for the moral guidance they are believed to offer the state. Beneath them come the peasant farmers, exalted in every official pronouncement as the true creators of wealth. They are the soil from which the empire's food and its stability both grow. Artisans follow, men who shape wood and metal and clay into useful things. And at the very bottom sit the merchants, viewed by the orthodox thinkers who built this hierarchy as something close to parasites. They create nothing. The thinking goes. They simply move goods from one hand to another and skim value off the passing. It is a tidy moral architecture, farmer above trader, labor above exchange. It is also almost everywhere a person might actually look, contradicted by what wealth in Han China actually looks like. A successful merchant's household can rival a nobleman's. The sumptuary laws were written specifically to keep such men in their assigned place. The taxes were designed to punish exactly this kind of accumulation. Traders across the empire take their profits and pour them into land regardless. They build vast agricultural estates, private hunting parks stocked for pleasure, fish ponds stretching wide enough to need their own retinue of keepers. It is not unusual for a single merchant patriarch's household to be served by more than 1,000 slaves. That is an aristocratic scale of comfort held by a man the state's own ideology ranks below the farmer working someone else's field. The four-class ideal placed him at the very bottom of Han society, beneath the scholar, beneath the farmer, beneath even the artisan. And yet his fish ponds are stocked. His hunting parks are stocked. His household runs on a scale most noble families would recognize as their own. The laws try to hold the line anyway. Merchants are forbidden from wearing fine silk, a fabric marked out for households the state considers respectable. They are forbidden from riding in horse-drawn carriages, another privilege set aside for rank rather than money. Both rules are written with real confidence, as though clothing and transportation could hold back a fortune once it grows large enough. But laws aimed at a man's carriage or his sleeve do very little against the scale of what he actually owns underneath them. The prohibitions prove almost impossible to enforce once merchant wealth outgrows the categories built to contain it. Elite traders eat the finest meats and grains money can buy, regardless of what the sumptuary code permits them. They operate, in practice, almost entirely outside the social control the state believed it had built. Many turn to lending, extending credit to struggling farmers at rates that eventually swallow the very land those farmers work. The merchant the state calls a parasite ends up owning the fields of the peasant the state calls the foundation of the empire. It is an irony the system produces and never once resolves. Not every merchant lives this way. In the crowded market lanes of Chang'an and Luoyang, past the grand estates, there are smaller stalls. They sell bronze fittings, cured leather, and food cooked over open coals. The men and women who run them are also called merchants, technically the same rank as the estate owner with his 1,000 slaves. But their lives share almost nothing with his. They are heavily burdened by what the state extracts from them, working long hours for narrow margins, a world away from private hunting parks and fish ponds. There is no fish pond behind their stall, no retinue of 1,000 slaves waiting at home. There is only the day's takings, counted out in copper, and whatever the state has already claimed from it before the coins ever reach their hands. The single word merchant spoken as though it named one kind of life, conceals a range running from genuine hardship to aristocratic excess. It is a label wide enough to hide almost everything true about the people wearing it. The land itself tells a gentler story, at least at first. In the earliest years of the Western Han, the empire is still recovering from the long, grinding contention between Chu and Han that preceded it. The state sets its tax on private harvests at 1/15 of the yield, deliberately low, meant to give exhausted farmland and exhausted farmers room to recover. Under Emperor Jing, decades later, the rate is cut again, down to 1/30 of the harvest. It is a strange thing for a government to do, lower its own primary source of income not once but twice. It happens here anyway. For a brief window in Han history, the hand reaching into the harvest basket reaches in more gently than it did the year before. The leniency does not extend to everyone equally. Alongside the land tax sits a second obligation, paid not in grain, but in hard copper coin, and it falls on every adult in the empire. This is the swanfu, the calculation tax owed each year by every man and woman between the ages of 15 and 56. It applies without regard for whether a harvest was good or bad that season. The standard rate is 120 coins. The revenue is earmarked for a specific purpose. It buys chariots and horses for the army, the machinery of a state that intends to fight. A household's harvest may be taxed gently, cut once, and then cut again by an emperor in a generous year. Its people are taxed by the head in cash, without exception. It does not matter what the fields yielded that year, or who lived in the house, or what they could actually spare. The state does not stop at collecting from everyone equally. It uses the same tax to push and to punish. Merchants and slave owners pay double the standard rate. 240 coins a year, a surcharge aimed directly at the wealth the state's own ideology already despises. Unmarried women over the age of 15 face something sharper still. Their rate is set 5 times higher than the standard, 600 coins, and it continues every year until they marry. The pressure falls on marital status alone, and it falls on women only. No comparable tax pushes a man toward the altar. Even the standard rate itself has not stayed fixed across the dynasty. Under Emperor Wen, it was cut to just 40 coins, a brief and gentler window. It echoes the same pattern visible in the land tax cuts before the harsher baseline of 120 coins took hold again elsewhere in the record. Children are not spared either. A separate tax, the Kukian, the mouth tax, targets minors specifically. It begins, in its original form, at age 7 and runs to age 14, 20 coins a year. Then Emperor Wu goes to war. He is funding his cavalry campaigns against the Xiongnu, and he needs more revenue than the existing tax base can supply. He lowers the starting age to just 3 years old. He raises the rate as well to 23 coins. For a poor household already stretched thin, a child that young becomes something close to a bill. It is a bill arriving years before that child can work to offset it. The documented result is severe. Destitute families, unable to meet the tax, turn in some recorded cases to infanticide, killing an infant specifically to avoid the burden its survival would bring. It is a tax policy with a body count built directly into its design. Money is not the only thing the state claims from its people. It claims their bodies too, directly under a system called yaoi, corvée labor. Every registered adult male owes 1 month of unpaid physical work each year. He repairs dikes. He builds the capital's walls. He digs the tombs meant to hold an emperor's body long after his own labor is forgotten. Beyond this monthly labor sits a second, heavier claim. Every man faces military conscription from age 23 to 56, later lowered to 20, for 2 years of active duty. The first year is spent training in a local garrison. The second sends him to the dangerous northern frontier, or to stand guard at the capital gates, far from whatever fields or family he left behind. There is a way out, but it costs money. A wealthy man can pay a commutation fee called gengfu, the rotating labor tax, and be excused from the physical obligation entirely. His coin buys someone else's labor in his place, a quiet precursor to a labor market later dynasties would formalize outright. In practice, this means the actual grinding work of empire building falls almost entirely on the poor. The dikes, the walls, the tombs, all of it lands on those too poor to pay their way free of it. The corvée is written into law as universal, owed by every man alike, one obligation stretched evenly across every household regardless of station. In the fields and on the walls, it is anything but even. The men swinging the tools are, overwhelmingly, the men who could not afford to be somewhere else. Before the year 118, before the Common Era, money itself is a mess. Coins vary in weight, in purity, in whether they have been shaved down at the edges. Hands looking to stretch a little metal further had plagued every coin before it. Emperor Wu ends the chaos with a single design. The Wuju coin is cast round with a square hole at its center, weighing exactly 5 zhu. Its outer rim is raised specifically to stop that shaving. A single coin buys almost nothing on its own. So coins are strung together on cords of hemp or silk, 1,000 at a time, into what is called a guan, a string of cash. A full string weighs somewhere between 2 and 3 kilograms. Money, in Han China, is not a thing carried loose in a pocket. It is a coil of weight slung over a shoulder. Coin is not the only currency moving through the empire. Silk is too, and at a scale that makes it something closer to a second, parallel money. Soldiers are paid in it. Debts are settled in it. It travels north as Heikin tribute to buy peace with the Xiongnu. It finances trade that reaches, eventually, as far as Rome, priced there against gold rather than treated as a mere luxury cloth. Copper cash handles the small transactions of daily life, the local market, the poll tax. Silk handles the large ones. To make that possible, the state holds silk's dimensions to a standard as strict as any coins. Archaeologists recovered a roll of tabby silk at Lulan on the old trade routes, and its measurements match the law almost exactly. A standard bolt runs 40 Chinese feet long and 2.2 feet wide, woven to that tolerance on purpose. When a length of cloth is meant to function as money, it has to be manufactured like money. It is cut to a standard a buyer 3 provinces away can trust without ever meeting the weaver. That trust rests on a fixed number. One jin of raw silk, roughly 500 grams, carries an official value of 300 coins. The state has set that figure to equal 3 sacks of rice. It ties the value of cloth directly to the value of the harvest that feeds the empire. This fixed peg is what lets a bolt of silk actually function as currency, rather than simply as a valuable good someone might want. Its worth does not float with a merchant's mood or a season's shortage. It is fixed by decree, guaranteed against the one commodity every household in the empire already understands, the grain that fills its own storehouses. A trader in a distant province can weigh a bolt of silk and know, without asking anyone, exactly how much rice it is worth. A popular story claims Han China enforced a strict death penalty on anyone caught smuggling silkworm eggs or the secrets of raising them across its borders. The story does not hold up under close reading. The Han state did guard its knowledge of sericulture jealously, protecting a monopoly worth guarding. But no Han law survives that codifies death specifically for egg smuggling. That particular punishment appears centuries later under the Northern Wei dynasty. The myth's real origin lies further away still. It comes from the writing of a 6th century Byzantine historian named Procopius. He described monks smuggling silkworm eggs inside hollow bamboo canes to the Byzantine Emperor Justinian, an episode 1,000 years removed from the Han. Somewhere in the retelling, that later empire's story quietly attached itself to this earlier one. The Han guarded silk fiercely, as the state currency it genuinely was. The death penalty for smuggling it belongs to a different empire's much later chapter, not to this one. What the Han actually built was simpler and no less remarkable. A bolt of cloth woven to precise legal tolerance, worth exactly 3 sacks of rice, not fabric anymore, so much as a kind of official truth about value. A woman sits at a low desk inside the palace at Luoyang, brush in hand, writing instructions for her own daughters. She tells them to rise before the household wakes. She tells them to labor without complaint, to dress plainly, to speak only when spoken to. The book she is writing will be called Lessons for Women. For centuries after her, it will be read as the clearest statement of what a Han woman was meant to become. Her name is Ban Zhao, and she reaches back in these same pages to an old birth custom to explain why. When a daughter was born in the earliest days of the ritual texts, the family laid her beneath the bed. They gave her a broken shard of pottery to hold instead of a toy. Ban Zhao offers this as proof, plainly stated, that a woman's place was low by design, her nature suited to yielding rather than command. She writes of husband and wife the way the old philosophers wrote of heaven and earth, hard and soft. The sun that moves and the moon that only reflects it. A wife who fails to serve, she warns, unbalances something larger than her own household. She unsettles yin and yang themselves, the two forces the entire visible world depends on for its order. 10 years before this, in the year 92, Ban Zhao's brother Ban Gu had died with the great dynastic history unfinished. Someone had to complete the Book of Han, the official record of the dynasty's founding century, and the throne did not turn to another court historian. It turned to Ban Gu's sister. The emperor summoned her to the imperial library himself and gave her the unfinished chronicles, the astronomical tables, the biographies of ministers long dead. She took up work no woman had been asked to do before her, and she did not merely finish her brother's draft. She wrote original treatises on the movement of the stars, dense enough that later scholars would cite them for their precision alone. She supervised a staff of court editors, all of them men, correcting their work and directing their research. She taught the women of the imperial harem their letters, becoming the closest thing the inner palace had to a resident scholar. The young Empress Deng Sui rose to power as regent, ruling in the name of a child emperor. It was Ban Zhao she turned to for counsel on matters of state. A woman instructed to be silent had become one of the most trusted political minds in the empire. The two facts sit uneasily beside each other, and Ban Zhao herself seems to have felt the strain. Buried inside her own book, past the passages on humility and service, she asks a pointed question. Boys in a Han household began their education at 8 years old, seated before the classics their whole lives would be built around. Girls received nothing of the kind. Ban Zhao argues this omission was not neutral. A marriage was supposed to be a bond between two educated minds, each capable of understanding the other. A wife kept illiterate could never fully occupy that role. It is a strange thing to find inside a book about staying quiet. She is not simply telling her daughters to submit. In the same breath, she is making the case that submission without learning was never the whole design to begin with. Later readers would not let the contradiction rest. In the early 20th century, China's own reformers began arguing for women's education and an end to arranged marriage. Ban Zhao became a target rather than a heroine. Feminist writers of that generation condemned her outright, naming her a traitor to her own sex. They read lessons for women as a betrayal. It was, to them, the words of a woman who had climbed higher than almost anyone in the empire, then pulled the ladder up behind her. To these critics, the book was not a private document, but a public weapon. It had armed centuries of fathers and husbands with a woman's own words, used to justify confining their daughters and wives. Her own success, in their eyes, made the book worse rather than better. She had known, better than almost anyone alive in her century, exactly what a woman was capable of doing. And she had used that knowledge to write instructions telling other women not to try it themselves. A different reading has taken hold more recently, built less on the words themselves than on the world they were written inside. The Han court was not a safe place to be visibly powerful. Entire consort clans, families who had married daughters into the palace and built influence through them, could be destroyed in a single purge. It only took one rival faction gaining the upper hand. Humility was not only a virtue in that world, it was a survival strategy, a way of holding real influence while appearing to hold none. On this reading, Ban Zhao's book was never a confession of what she believed a woman should be. It was armor, cut to a shape the court expected to see, worn by a woman who understood exactly how much power she was hiding underneath it. A woman rides into the capital from a family of no particular standing, the daughter of a minor commoner household with no title behind her name. She marries a rough-edged rebel leader named Liu Bang, a man who will go on to found an empire. When he dies in the year 195 before the Common Era, she does not retreat into mourning. She takes the reins of the state herself, ruling as Empress Dowager in fact, if not always in name, and holds that grip for 15 years. Her policies are careful and effective. Grain reserves grow. The countryside, exhausted by decades of war, begins to recover under her hand. Her name is Lu Ji, and she becomes, in this same stretch of years, one of the most feared rulers the early dynasty will ever produce. Two men had helped build the empire she now controlled. Han Xin and Peng Yue were generals whose brilliance on the battlefield had done as much as anyone to win her husband his throne. Their armies had broken rival kingdoms and secured the roads that let Gaozu's rule reach every corner of the new empire. Once Gaozu was dead, that same brilliance became a liability rather than an asset. Loyalty that answered to a single dead man could just as easily answer to no one and command enough troops to make that choice on its own. Lu Ji had both men executed within a few years of each other. Each death was arranged so carefully that neither general saw the trap closing until it already had. Skill that could not be controlled was skill that had to be removed. She did not hesitate over the men who had helped make her family's rule possible in the first place. Her cruelty found its sharpest expression not in the men who had threatened her power, but in a woman who had merely been loved by her husband. Lady Qi had been Gaozu's favored concubine, and Lu Ji's hatred of her had waited years for its moment. She had Qi's young son poisoned first, removing the boy who might have challenged her own son's claim to the throne. Then she turned to the mother. She ordered Qi's hands and feet cut away, her eyes put out, her tongue cut from her mouth, and her ears burned closed. What remained, she had thrown into a latrine pit. She called the result the human swine, and she did not hide this from her own son. She forced the new emperor, her own child, to look at what she had made, a lesson delivered in a language that needed no words at all. The same woman who had ordered that mutilation inside her own household found herself, a few years later, facing a much smaller insult from outside it. She had no easy answer for this one. In the year 192 before the Common Era, the Xiongnu leader Modu Chanyu sent her a letter. He described himself as a lonely ruler born among the marshes. He described her as a widow ruling alone. He proposed that the two of them might exchange what each was lacking for what the other possessed. It was a deliberate insult wrapped in the language of a marriage proposal. It was aimed at a woman who now ruled an empire in her own right, sent by a man whose armies she had no real way of stopping. Her first instinct was fury, and she wanted war. Her military advisors told her plainly what a war would cost. The Xiongnu cavalry would cut through Han forces before the campaign properly began, and the empire she had spent years rebuilding could not survive the loss. She swallowed the insult instead. Her reply to the Kanyu claimed her hair had thinned and her teeth had begun to fall out. She wrote that she was now too old and frail to appear worthy of his attention. Along with the letter, she sent gifts of horses and carriages, smoothing the refusal with tribute rather than defiance. It was calculated self-diminishment, chosen deliberately over a war she could not win. This was a woman who had just shown exactly what she was capable of doing to anyone she believed she could defeat. She chose humiliation the moment the threat came from someone she could not. That imbalance of power is what kept alive an arrangement already years old by then, one struck to buy peace along the northern frontier. It had begun in the year 200, before the Common Era. An earlier Han army had been surrounded and nearly destroyed by Xiongnu cavalry, a defeat the court never forgot. Every year afterward, the Han sent the Xiongnu court silk, wine and grain, along with a bride drawn from the imperial family. It was a tribute dressed carefully in the language of marriage. Lu Ji maintained this system across her whole regency, sending other families' daughters north without apparent hesitation. When it came to her own daughter, Princess Yuan of Lu, she would not do it. She wept and she vetoed the match. She kept her own child in the capital while enforcing the same arrangement on every other family in the empire. What replaced the princess who never went was deception on a routine basis. The court quietly selected commoner women, minor palace attendants, or distant relations several branches removed from the throne. Officials gave each one the title of princess before sending her north. The Xiongnu received a bride who satisfied the treaty's letter without ever touching its spirit. Meanwhile, the court at Chang'an kept its own daughters at home, letting the paperwork call someone else's daughter a princess instead. No one at the Xiongnu court seems to have minded, so long as the shipments of silk and grain kept arriving on schedule. The arrangement survived for generations this way. It was less a marriage alliance in any real sense than a tribute payment wearing a wedding dress. Its human cost was quietly absorbed by women with no name anyone at court thought worth remembering. A boy tends sheep on the grounds of a noble household, the Marquis of Pingyang's estate. His hands are rough from rope and weather before he is old enough to understand why. His mother is an enslaved serving woman inside that household. His father is a lowly clerk who was never going to claim him. Under Han law, a child born to an enslaved mother is property from the moment of birth. He is counted the same as a mule or a length of cloth, with no path out written anywhere into the statutes. His name is Wei Qing, and his half-brothers, born free to the same father through a different recognized union, treat him accordingly. They beat him. They send him to the stables when the real work is done. He learns early that his blood counts for less than theirs, though the same man fathered them both. No law and no petition changed what Wei Qing was. What changed it was his half-sister's face. Wei Zifu sang in the same household where he served. During a visit to the estate, the young Emperor Wu noticed her among the household's singers and asked that she be brought to the palace. Her position there rose year by year. In the year 128 before the Common Era, she was named Empress, the highest rank any woman at court could hold. She did not rise alone. She pulled her whole family out of bondage as she climbed, and her brother Wei Qing walked free from the household that had once owned him. He was given a place at court, first as bodyguard, then as a counselor the emperor had begun to trust with more than his own safety. Emperor Wu was preparing by then to abandon decades of paying tribute to the Xiongnu and strike at them directly. In the year 129 before the Common Era, he sent 4 commanders north with roughly 3,000 cavalry apiece. One command went to Wei Qing, a man who had worn a slave's collar within the same decade. The court watched to see what a former stable boy would do with an army of his own to lead. The seasoned aristocratic generals sent out alongside him found no enemy to fight, or were routed when they did. Wei Qing rode deep into the steppe instead. He struck the Xiongnu's sacred site at Longcheng, a raid that reached further and hit harder than anything the pedigreed commanders managed that same season. By the year 124 before the Common Era, Wei Qing commanded a force of more than 100,000 troops. He used them to strike the wise king of the right in a night raid through the Ordos region. He caught the Xiongnu prince's camp unprepared in the darkness. Tents, cook fires, sleeping men, with no warning that Han riders had crossed so far into their own territory. By morning, the Han had taken 15,000 nobles and warriors as prisoners. They drove more than 100,000 head of livestock back across the frontier behind them. The court elevated him afterward to General-in-Chief, the highest military rank the empire could grant. It was a title now held by a man the law had once classified alongside its cattle and its cloth. He rode home from the Ordos at the head of everything he had taken. A tomb at Mawangdui had been sealed since 168 before the Common Era. 1973, archaeologists opened it. Inside, wrapped and folded, lay sheets of silk covered in brushed characters, undisturbed for more than 2,000 years. The silk had survived the collapse of the tomb around it. It had survived the dynasty that made it and the ones that came after. What the archaeologists found written across it was a system of medicine the world had assumed was already whole by that point in history, already fixed in its final form. It was not whole. It was still being built, one uncertain answer at a time, and the silk had simply stopped recording it mid-sentence. Before the Han dynasty, sickness had a different kind of cause. A fever was the work of a demon that had found its way into the body. A wasting illness might mean an ancestor had gone unfed, unhonored, and had turned its hunger on the family that forgot it. The healer's task in that world was not to understand the body so much as to negotiate with what had entered it through ritual, through offering, through the specific words that might persuade a spirit to leave. By the time the Han dynasty ended 4 centuries later, that entire framework had been replaced. Illness was no longer a visitor. It was an imbalance, something moving wrong inside a system governed by opposing forces held in constant tension, warmth and cold, rising and falling, the same forces believed to shape the seasons and the sky. This was not a refinement of the old belief. It was a different belief entirely, built from nothing the demons and ancestors had ever required. 10 years after Mawangdui, in 1983, a second tomb opened at Zhangjiashan, sealed in 186 before the Common Era, only 20 years apart from the first. This one held its medical knowledge on bamboo, not silk, strips of it bound together and lowered into the dark. Among them were 2 texts. One was called the Book of Vessels. The other was called the Pulling Book, and together they gave historians something neither tomb alone could offer: 2 independent snapshots of the same unfinished science, separated by only a few decades, each one confirming what the other had recorded. Both were older than any classical medical text, long assumed to be the origin of Chinese medicine. Neither had come from a single origin at all. They had come from 2 different hands, working the same uncertain ground at nearly the same time. What both texts describe is a body mapped by 11 vessels, running mostly along the arms and legs, gathering toward the head or the heart. The mapping stays close to the surface. It follows the skin, the muscle just beneath it. The places a hand might actually press or a needle might reach without going deep. Nowhere in either text do these 11 vessels connect to the organs working inside the body, the heart, the liver, the lungs. The surface and the interior are still two separate systems, described without a bridge between them, as though the map makers had charted the coastline of a country whose interior remained blank. The treatment that follows from this incomplete map is, fittingly, a surface treatment. A healer burns dried mugwort at specific points along the skin, close enough to warm the tissue beneath without breaking it, coaxing circulation back into a vessel that has gone cold or stagnant. The needle, the thin metal instrument that would one day define this entire tradition in the world's imagination, appears nowhere in either text. It had not been invented yet, or if it had, no one had thought to write it down. The pulling book holds one more discovery, separate from the vessels and the moxibustion, a system of movement called Daoyin, guiding and pulling. 41 exercises, each one modeled on the motion of an animal or a bear's slow lumber, a bird stretching its wings before flight. The purpose was not strength. It was to stretch the body's own channels open, to expel breath that had gone stale and stagnant, and to bring the practitioner's rhythm into alignment with whichever season was turning outside. This was medicine practiced with the whole body in motion, not a patient lying still beneath a healer's hands, and it developed alongside the vessel theory rather than growing out of it. Two separate paths toward the same unfinished understanding of what kept a person well. The Yellow Emperor's Inner Canon is the text every history of Chinese medicine eventually returns to. It is treated as though it descended whole and finished from some distant antiquity. It did not. Most of it was compiled between the 1st century before the Common Era and the 1st century after. That places its composition within living memory of the silk in the Mawangdui tomb and the bamboo at Zhangjiashan. The scholars assembling it were not reaching back across some unimaginable gulf of time to recover a lost wisdom. They were working from the same uncertain, half-finished material those two burials had preserved, close enough in years that a single long life could have spanned both. The canon has two halves. Its second half is called the spiritual pivot, and it is here, in this second half, that the real transformation happens. Where the earlier vessel maps had stopped at the surface of the body, the spiritual pivot pushes further in. It adds a 12th channel, the triple energizer, completing what had been an incomplete count of 11. But the addition of one more channel is not the important change. What matters is that the spiritual pivot finally does what neither Mawangdui nor Zhangjiashan had managed. It connects the surface vessels directly to the organs working beneath them, the heart, the liver, the lungs. Skin and interior weave into a single continuous loop, one through which blood and vital breath could now be understood to flow. The coastline finally meets the country it had only ever traced the edge of. A map that had been two disconnected halves for generations becomes, in this one text, whole. That single change in theory reshapes the practice that follows from it. Moxibustion, warming the skin from outside, had suited a model where the body's surface was all a healer could reasonably claim to understand. Once the surface connects to the interior, a cruder warmth is no longer precise enough. The spiritual pivot turns instead toward acupuncture, the fine insertion of a needle at an exact point, and it does not leave that precision vague. It maps 365 specific points across the body, each one a junction where the flow of vital breath could be reached and adjusted directly. The tool changes because the map underneath it changed first. A rougher method had matched a rougher understanding, and a finer one now matched a finer one. A common assumption holds that this entire system grew from philosophy alone, an idea of the body built in the abstract. No hand on this assumption was ever laid on tissue to confirm it. The spiritual pivot does not support that assumption. It describes a sanctioned practice of dissection, bodies opened and studied directly. The details it records are startlingly specific for a text often treated as pure metaphysics. It notes that the liver divides into a left lobe and a right. It gives the spleen's weight as 3 caties and 3 ounces. It measures the full length of the digestive tract, from the stomach down to its end, at roughly 33 feet. None of this reads like speculation dressed up as anatomy. It reads like observation, hands moving through open tissue long before the theory around it was finished. The philosophy and the physical body seem to have checked each other the whole time. The Eastern Han was dying by the year 200 of the Common Era, and it was dying in waves of fever. Epidemic after epidemic swept through a population already weakened by famine and war, and among the physicians who watched it happen was a man named Zhang Zhongjing. He did not sit down to write a timeless philosophy of the body. He sat down because people were dying in front of him, in patterns he could see repeating. He wanted those patterns written down before they were lost with the people who carried them. The text that came out of that year is called the Treatise on Cold Damage. It remains, even now, a foundation of the medicine that grew from it. It was not born in a quiet study. It was born at a bedside in the middle of a crisis that gave the author no time for abstraction. The Yellow Emperor's inner canon had leaned toward cosmology, toward prevention, toward the fine needlework of acupuncture along 365 mapped points. Zhang's treatise leaned the other way entirely. It was a clinical manual built around what a physician could actually observe at a sickbed and what herbs might actually be measured out in response. He organized disease into 6 stages, which he called the 6 conformations, each one a name for how far an illness had traveled through the body. Taiyang came first, then Yangming, then Shaoyang, moving deeper with each stage, followed by Taiyin, Shaoyin, and Jueyin at the furthest reach. This was not a checklist of separate ailments. It was a single map of one disease changing as it moved, the same way a river changes character between its source and its mouth. An illness begins on this model as something cold pressing in from outside. It reaches the body's outermost layer, the Taiyang, and announces itself there first. Chills come first, then fever, then a pulse that seems to float just beneath the fingertips rather than settle into it. If the illness is met and turned back at this outer layer, the danger passes. If it is not, it does not simply linger. It pushes inward past the surface, deeper into the body's yin layers, and what follows is worse than what came before. Diarrhea sets in and will not stop. The organs begin to fail under a strain they were never built to hold for so long. The whole body starts to collapse under a weight that began, days earlier, as nothing more than a chill and a fever at the skin. Zhang's response to this moving disease was a treatment that moved with it. He would not write down one fixed cure for one named illness. the way earlier medicines sometimes had. Instead, he built formulas from multiple herbs combined, something like mahuang tang. Each one was matched not to the disease's name, but to its exact location inside the 6 stages. It was matched to the pulse a physician could feel and the symptoms a patient could describe in that moment. This approach came to be called treatment based on pattern identification. It asked a physician to track an illness the way a hunter tracks a moving animal, adjusting constantly rather than aiming once at a fixed target. A single sickness at 2 different stages might call for 2 entirely different remedies. The physician's task was never finished the moment a diagnosis was made. It had only just begun because the disease itself was still moving. The treatment had to keep moving with it, stage by stage, breath by breath, for as long as the fever lasted. A wall runs through the hexy corridor, low and the color of the desert around it, built from nothing that had to travel far to reach it. It is not stone. There are no battlements rising toward a walkway, no crenellations cut clean against the sky, none of the imagery a listener might carry from later centuries. This wall was raised from rammed earth, loess and sand and gravel pounded hard between wooden frames until the material set solid enough to stand. Workers packed one layer, then lifted the frame, then packed the next layer above it. They repeated this over and over, until a barrier 5 to 8 meters high stood where there had only been open desert before. Beacon towers rose along its length at intervals, moats dug beside sections of it, garrisons stationed at points where the wall needed watching. It was an answer built from whatever the desert actually offered, not from stone quarried and hauled across a country that had none nearby to spare. In the driest stretches, where the loess itself would not hold together under any amount of pounding, the builders changed their method entirely. This happened specifically in the most arid desert country the wall crossed, ground too loose and too dry for rammed earth to set properly at all. They layered gravel and sand with reeds, with tamarisk twigs, with needlegrass bound in between the mineral layers. It formed an organic mesh, threaded through to hold the wall against the wind that would otherwise carry it away grain by grain. This was not the same technique used elsewhere, along the same defensive line, where rammed earth held on its own without any binding. It was a second solution, built for a harder problem. Even rammed earth could not be trusted to survive the erosion of an open desert wind here. The builders reached instead for whatever grew nearby that might hold the wall together against it. The wall's purpose is not what popular memory has settled on. Historians studying the record, Nicola di Cosmo and Owen Lattimore among them, have argued that keeping Xiongnu cavalry out was never the wall's primary function. It regulated instead. It managed who could move through a given stretch of frontier, what goods could pass and where, which travelers belonged on which side. It projected the reach of Han authority into land too dry to farm, land the empire could not otherwise hold with settlement alone. It secured the oases that would one day carry the Silk Road's trade. It worked as a place to collect tolls from merchants crossing between one world and the other. Lattimore pushed the idea further still. The wall, in his reading, was built as much to hold Han farmers in as to hold anyone else out. It kept them from slipping across the line and joining the nomadic groups beyond it, forming hybrid communities the empire could no longer tax or conscript. A barrier against outsiders becomes, in this light, a valve controlling the empire's own population. That the wall managed a frontier at all assumes the Han held the stronger hand across it, and for decades that assumption would have been wrong. In the dynasty's early years, the Xiongnu Confederation was the stronger military power, and Han China was the weaker party forced into paying for peace. This arrangement was called Heikin, a tributary marriage alliance. Under it, the Han court sent silk, luxury goods, and imperial princesses north to the Xiongnu Chanyu simply to keep the peace intact. It is the opposite of the image most people carry of a dominant, expansionist Han empire pressing outward from strength. For the better part of a generation, the empire that would eventually command the steppe began instead as the junior partner. It paid tribute to buy the years it needed before it could afford to do anything else. That balance held until Emperor Wu decided the treasury could finally support a different strategy. In 133 before the Common Era, Han forces set an ambush at a town called Mei'ai. They gathered 300,000 troops to lure the Junshan Chanyu and his cavalry into a trap. The Chanyu sensed something was wrong before the trap could close around him. He turned his forces and fled the field entirely, and no real battle was fought that day. But the peace itself did not survive the attempt. Mei'ai broke the arrangement that had held for decades without either side losing a single soldier in open combat. What followed was not a resumption of tribute, but the opening of a war that would run for years. Between 119 and 105 before the Common Era, Han cavalry pushed deep into territory the Xiongnu had held for generations. Campaign after campaign broke the Confederation's hold on the region piece by piece. The Hexi corridor fell under Han control. The Tarim Basin followed, annexed in the same sustained push. What opened behind these campaigns was a stretch of overland routes that would come to carry silk and glass and paper between empires that had never met. These routes are remembered now almost entirely for peaceful trade, caravans and merchants, and the slow exchange of goods across enormous distance. That memory forgets how they opened. The road most associated with commerce and exchange was, at its origin, the direct result of a specific and dated military campaign. Cavalry cleared the ground before any merchant ever crossed it, meaning the peaceful road came second and the war that made it possible came first. Feeding an army across the Gobi presented a problem no amount of cavalry skill could solve on its own. Pack animals hauling grain across that distance ate much of their own cargo, simply making the journey. A long supply line stretching back to the capital became ruinously expensive before a single soldier was fed. The Han answer was a system called Tuntian, soldier colonists who farmed the frontier themselves during quiet stretches between campaigns. They dug irrigation canals into ground that had never held water on purpose. They planted grain, harvested it, and stored the surplus in granaries built close to where the fighting would eventually happen. When the campaigns resumed, Han armies could strike deep into the steppe from bases already stocked with food. This was an offensive posture, a force dependent on foraging as it marched, simply could not sustain. This was not a battlefield advantage won by better soldiers. It was an advantage built years earlier, quietly, by men digging canals in the off-season. The paperwork behind that system survives in an archive called the Juyan Hanjian. It holds roughly 40,000 slips of bamboo and wood, pulled from frontier watchtowers across Inner Mongolia and Gansu since the 1930s. Each slip runs about the length of a Han foot, and together they record a war fought as much through administration as through combat. 17 of these slips lay out, in careful and almost bureaucratic detail, the exact signaling protocol for approaching danger. A specific number of fires and flags corresponded to a specific estimated size of enemy cavalry. A watchman miles from any fighting could read an approaching threat from smoke alone. The defensive grid beneath this signaling was itself precise. A beacon stood every 5 li. A tower stood every 10. A fort held every 30 li along the line, and a castle anchored every 100. A war measured out in exact repeating distances across empty ground. The same archive holds more than warnings of cavalry. It holds the ordinary record of people stationed far from home, waiting. Grain rations differed for soldiers, for the women who lived among them, for their children, each amount written down and tracked in careful, unglamorous detail. Prices for everyday goods like licorice appear beside private letters between garrison personnel and beside IOUs, small debts owed from one soldier to another. It is the kind of paperwork any household or workplace might generate, never expecting it to survive 2,000 years. This is one of the only places the Empire's own paperwork survives from the perspective of the people actually stationed on its edge. It is a rare window onto their world rather than the court that had sent them there in the first place. It reads as a ledger of ordinary survival rather than a record of command. Even the horses received this kind of careful, individual record. The registers note each animal's sex, its color, its height, its age, one line per horse across thousands of entries. Most recorded horses lived to only 7 or 9 years old, worked hard on a frontier that offered little rest. The ones that survived past 15 were rare enough to earn names of their own, actual honorific titles written into the register beside them. One was called 1,000 Years. Another was called Ancient Elder. A 24-year-old horse was recorded as Yarrow Elder. It was the same reverence Han culture extended to its aged human elders. Now, on this remote frontier, it extended to an animal that had simply outlasted its expected years, pulling supplies along the line. All of this rested on a standing force whose true size rarely enters the popular memory of the dynasty. At full strength, the Han army numbered somewhere between 500,000 and 700,000 troops. More than 150,000 of them were professional soldiers, trained and maintained, rather than conscripted for a single campaign and released. Up to 100,000 were cavalry, held specifically for the kind of deep strikes into open steppe that had shattered Xiongnu power in the campaigns just described. This was the human and material base beneath every raid, every ambush, every fort standing along that low earthen wall. It was a force large enough and permanent enough to make the entire frontier system possible in the first place. A scribe in the Han court dips his brush and writes 2 characters that name a place no living person in the room has ever seen. Da Qin. Great Qin, borrowed from the dynasty's own vanished predecessor, offered now to a kingdom somewhere past the edge of every map the court possesses. The name is not a guess. It is not a rumor picked up second-hand from a caravan driver and repeated without thought. It carries the weight the Han reserve for civilizations they consider real, ordered, worth naming properly, rather than dismissing as some vague haze at the world's rim. Rome, for its part, has already done the same thing in reverse. Roman writers call the distant eastern population Ceres, the Silk people. The name is wrapped in its own kind of respect, tinged with the shimmer of something wealthy and half-legendary. Two empires, each aware the other exists, each incapable of putting a face to the name. The Ho Hanshu does not stop at naming Darkin. It describes the place, and the description is not neutral. Its people are tall, the text says, and honest, and in that honesty they resemble the Han themselves. This is not simple reporting. It is a mirror held up across an unimaginable distance. What the Han see reflected back is their own standard of order and virtue, projected onto a civilization they have never touched. A wealthy nation, legally ordered, worthy of respect, precisely because it resembles home. No court scribe traveled to Darchin to verify any of this. The description was built entirely from second-hand report, filtered through merchants and interpreters who had themselves never crossed the full distance either. And yet the account does not read as vague or uncertain. It reads as confident, almost familiar, the way a person describes a relative they have heard about their whole life, but never actually met. The comparison says as much about the eyes doing the looking as it does about the empire being looked at. Darchin becomes, in the telling, less a foreign place than a distant version of home, ordered by the same values, worthy for the same reasons. Between these two nations sit the Parthians, and behind the Parthians, the Kushans. Both of them profit enormously from exactly the distance the Han and Roman courts each wish were smaller. Silk moves west through their territory. Glass moves east through it. Every transaction along that corridor passes through hands that take a cut. Neither Rome nor Han ever sees the other side of the exchange directly. The two middlemen kingdoms control the physical roads and river crossings a caravan actually has to use. Control of the road becomes control of the price charged at every stop along it. The barrier between the two empires is not, in the end, a matter of geography. Mountains can be crossed. Deserts can be crossed. What cannot be crossed, not easily, is a monopoly actively defended by the merchants standing in the middle of it. These are men with every reason to keep two great markets permanently unaware of how close they actually are. They have every reason to profit quietly from the gap between them, for as long as it can be sustained. In the year 97, the Han general Ban Chao decides to test that distance for himself. He sends an envoy named Gan Ying west, with instructions to reach Darchin directly and cut the Parthian middlemen out of the arrangement entirely. Gan Ying travels further than any recorded Han subject before him. He moves through unfamiliar country until he reaches Tiaozi, near the shore of what would later be called the Persian Gulf. He is, at this point, closer to Roman territory than any Han envoy has ever stood. Water replaces road for the first time in the entire journey. And there, at the edge of the water, Parthian sailors meet him with a warning. The crossing ahead, they tell him, could take 3 months. It could take 2 years, depending entirely on the wind. Men who attempt it are known to die of homesickness alone, they say. Any traveler foolish enough to try should carry 3 years of provisions before setting out. Gan Ying has no ship of his own, no way to verify any of it against experience. He turns back toward Chang'an, the sea still ahead of him, Rome still unseen. The Ho Hanshu records what Gan Ying could not have known standing on that shore. The Parthians, it states plainly, gave him a false account of the journey on purpose. They wanted to keep trading with Dachin themselves. An envoy who reached Rome directly would have ended that arrangement for good. It is a rare moment in the record. Most deception in these old accounts has to be inferred. It gets pieced together centuries later by historians reading between the lines of what a text chooses not to say. Here, the text simply says it. The lie is named as a lie, the motive stated as plainly as the outcome. Gan Ying's turned-back journey stops being an accident of geography. It becomes, instead, the result of a choice made by men who profited from his failure. Nearly 70 years pass before another attempt at contact reaches the record, and this time it arrives from the opposite direction entirely. In the year 166, a delegation appears in the southern commandery of Renan. It claims to represent the king of Dachin, a ruler they name as Undun. The name is a phonetic echo, close enough that later readers will recognize it as Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, Emperor of Rome itself. The delegation carries what it calls tribute, presented with the formal weight the word demands. Ivory, rhinoceros horn, tortoise shell. To the men who brought them, the gesture is a claim, an emperor of one great empire reaching toward another. Han court officials examine the offerings and recognize them immediately. They are not anything Mediterranean, but ordinary goods pulled from Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean trade. They are the kind of thing a local merchant could gather without ever leaving familiar waters. Any coastal trader passing through Renan might have carried them for a fraction of the ceremony. Modern historians looking back at the encounter have largely settled on what it actually was. Scholars including Burley, McLaughlin and Ball agree the delegation was very likely a group of freelance merchants. These were Roman or Alexandrian traders acting entirely on their own, borrowing an emperor's name to secure an audience they could never have earned honestly. No official Roman mission ever authorized the journey, and no Roman record anywhere mentions sending one. The men who walked into that southern commandery understood exactly what a Han court official wanted to hear. They gave it to him, tribute and imperial title included. What lends the story its thread of truth is a scatter of physical evidence found far from any court record. Roman medallions bearing the faces of Antoninus Pius and Marcus Aurelius have turned up in Vietnam. They are proof that a real maritime trade route connected the two worlds. The embassy claiming to represent it was never anything more than a convenient fiction dressed up for a captive audience. The goods themselves crossed the distance long before any embassy tried to, real or invented. Roman glassware, prized in Han markets for a clarity local craftsmen could not match, has been unearthed in a Western Han tomb in Guangzhou. It dates to the 1st century before the Common Era. More of it turns up in an Eastern Han tomb in Luoyang generations later on the far side of the dynasty entirely. Two burials, separated by hundreds of years and hundreds of miles, both holding the same foreign glass. No treaty explains how it got there. No named envoy carried it. No court record announces its arrival. It simply moved hand to hand, boat to caravan to market stall, along a route that never needed an emperor's blessing to keep functioning. The objects outlasted every failed mission and every turned-back envoy this chapter has already followed. They are proof that trade and diplomacy were never quite the same current, even when they ran along the same road. Silk made the same journey in reverse. Fragments of heavy Han weave have been recovered from the tower tombs of Palmyra, deep in Roman Syria. They lay folded into burial chambers built for a different empire's dead. Roman writers describe what happened to the cloth before it reached those tombs. Workshops in Alexandria and Tyre took the heavy imported weave apart thread by thread. They respun it into something thinner, sheerer, dyed in brighter colors than the original weavers in Han China had ever intended. The result became a fashion sensation across Roman society, worn by women whose bodies showed clearly through the fabric. It became a scandal in the same breath. Seneca the Elder condemns the resulting silks as decadent, a moral failure draped over Roman bodies, proof of an empire losing its discipline to Eastern luxury. The condemnation changes nothing about how badly Rome wants them. Pliny the Elder puts a number to the appetite, complaining that Eastern luxuries drain the empire of 100 million sesterces every year. Later scholars suspect he inflated the figure, though the anxiety behind it was real enough. Rome wanted Han silk exactly as much as Han wanted Roman glass. Two empires pulled on opposite ends of the same thread, neither one ever quite reaching the hand on the other side. A child sits on a throne built for a grown man's shoulders. His feet do not reach the floor. Around him, adults who understand exactly what his small body means for their own futures have already begun arranging themselves. By the late 2nd century, this scene has stopped being an emergency at the Han court and become something closer to routine. An emperor dies young or fails to produce an heir who lives to adulthood, and the throne passes to a boy who cannot yet read the reports piled on his own desk. Real power does not wait for him to grow into it. It moves instead to his mother, now Empress Dowager, and to the relatives who arrived at court through her marriage. These consort clans staff the ministries with their own sons and nephews, control the palace guard, and speak in the emperor's name long before he is old enough to know what is being said. The pattern repeats with an almost mechanical patience, one child after another, one regency dissolving only to be replaced by the next. Somewhere inside the palace walls, a different kind of man has been watching this cycle from much closer to the ground. The eunuchs who staff the inner apartments have no families of their own to advance, no clan waiting outside the gates to benefit from a coup. What they have instead is proximity. They dress the emperor as a child, deliver his meals, sit near him through the long private hours no consort relative ever sees. When that child grows old enough to resent the men who have been ruling in his name, it is the eunuchs he turns to, because they are the only faction already inside his reach who might help him break the consort clan's grip. The alliance works. Emperor after emperor leans on his eunuchs to strip power from his mother's family, and eunuch after eunuch converts that trust into something durable. They place their own relatives in office. They eliminate rivals who threaten their new position. Wealth accumulates around men who, by the old rules of Han society, are not even supposed to have families to enrich. Confucian scholars watching from the outer bureaucracy see something closer to a second infection than a cure. These are the men who sat for the recommendation system's probation, who studied the classics at the Imperial Academy, who believed the state's own promise that virtue and learning were what elevated a man. Watching palace servants outmaneuver them for real influence reads to them. as a betrayal of everything the system was supposed to reward. That resentment does not stay quiet. In the 1860s, it breaks into open conflict, and the eunuch faction wins it decisively. Hundreds of the empire's most capable officials and students are executed, imprisoned, or permanently barred from holding office in a series of purges the record calls the partisan prohibitions. These are not anonymous casualties. Many are men who spent years inside the recommendation pipeline, vetted, probated, promoted on the strength of reputations built exactly as the system intended. The empire does not simply lose them. It removes them by its own hand at precisely the moment its administration most needs steady, competent people at every level. A government does not usually survive by cutting out its own most functional organ. The Khan tries anyway. Outside the palace, in the fields and market towns the court rarely thinks about, a slower kind of damage has been accumulating for decades. Wealthy landowning families, many of them shielded from the tax collector by the same political connections that keep them out of trouble at court, have been steadily buying up the land around them. Ordinary smallholders, meanwhile, face the same tax burden and labor obligations their grandfathers faced, with none of the protection. A bad harvest, a sudden debt, a poll tax due in hard currency when the household has none, and a family that once worked its own fields finds itself working someone else's instead. Some become tenant farmers, paying rent in crop share to a landlord who was, a generation earlier, simply a neighbor with slightly more land. Others fall further, into outright debt bondage, working off an obligation that never quite clears. Millions of households make this same descent, one at a time, invisible from the capital. The state's own tax rolls quietly shrink with them. Every farmer who becomes a tenant is a household the treasury can no longer easily reach, and a son who can no longer easily be conscripted. The empire's fiscal and military strength has been eroding from underneath for years before anyone in Luoyang treats it as a crisis. Then the river itself turns against the empire. The Yellow River floods across a stretch of years in the late 2nd century, drowning millions of acres of farmland that had, until then, still been feeding people. Grain that should have filled storehouses rots in standing water instead. Famine follows the flooding the way it always has, and disease follows the famine, moving through villages already weakened by hunger and already thinned by decades of quiet tax pressure. None of this happens to a healthy state. It happens to one already carrying the strain of an eroded tax base, a purged bureaucracy, and a court more interested in its own internal factions than in the condition of its own fields. The desperation this leaves behind does not stay contained to any one province. It becomes the audience an entirely new kind of movement has been waiting for. A healer moves through villages that have already buried more of their own than they can properly mourn. Zhang Jue does not arrive as a doctor in any court sense. He arrives with the language of the way, offering water blessed against sickness and a promise that the suffering families are living through means something larger than bad luck or a swollen river. The Han dynasty, he tells them, has lost the mandate of heaven that once justified its rule. A new age is coming, one built on the element of earth rather than the corrupt fire the Han claims as its own. His followers begin binding yellow cloth around their heads to mark themselves as belonging to that coming age, a small piece of fabric turned into a declaration. The cosmology behind it is not foreign to anyone listening. It is the same 5 phases logic the Han court itself has used for generations to explain why its own rule was legitimate in the first place, now turned back against it by a healer standing in a flooded field. In the year 184, that quiet following becomes an army. Hundreds of thousands of men and women rise at once across the empire, wearing their yellow headwear, moving on government offices and killing the local officials and landowners who had spent years tightening the same tax and land pressures. The rebellion now answers. Entire commanderies in the north fall out of central control within weeks. The response that should meet an uprising of this size does not come. The central army stationed at Luoyang, the same force meant to guard the capital and project imperial authority outward, has spent decades absorbing the damage of factional purges and eunuch patronage rather than training for exactly this kind of war. It cannot suppress what is happening. It can barely slow it. Faced with a rebellion its own standing forces cannot handle, the court makes a decision it will not be able to undo. Regional generals and provincial governors are granted sweeping new authority to raise private armies of their own, funded and commanded outside the normal chain that runs back to Luoyang. Men like Zhu Jun and Huang Fu Song lead these forces into the field, and a rising officer named Cao Cao begins building the reputation that will define the rest of his life. By early the following year, the main rebel force has been broken. Zhang Juhe himself never faces capture. He dies of illness before his own army's collapse is complete, the healer outlived by neither his prophecy nor his followers' defeat. The dynasty survives the rebellion. It does not survive what the rebellion cost to put down. Every general who raised troops to save the Han now commands a private force loyal to himself rather than to any distant emperor. And there is no longer a central army strong enough to make him give it up. The same men who had just defended the empire turn those armies on each other next, and eventually on the capital itself. Having handed away its monopoly on organized force once, under pressure, the Han court finds there is no clean way to take it back. In the year 189, one of those generals stops waiting his turn. Dong Zhuo marches into Luoyang, takes the young emperor as a hostage inside what should have been his own palace, and sets fire to the capital his troops now control. Smoke rises over a city that had only a few years earlier still functioned as the seat of an empire spanning most of a continent. What follows is not a single battle or a single defeat. It is decades of continuous civil war, warlord against warlord, each man commanding the kind of private army the Yellow Turban Rebellion had made possible and the court had never found a way to dissolve. Out of that fighting, one commander begins to outlast the others. Cao Cao consolidates control across the north and tries, for a time, to reunify the empire under Emperor Xian, who still holds the title of Son of Heaven, even as Cao Cao holds every real lever of power beneath him. That ambition breaks in the year 208 at the Battle of Red Cliffs, where Cao Cao's fleet is destroyed and his hope of swift reunification dies with it on the water. He never gets another chance to finish what he started. When he dies in the year 220, his son forces Emperor Xian to abdicate, and 4 centuries of Han rule end not with a foreign army at the gates, but with the empire's own generals dividing what is left of it among themselves. 3 kingdoms rise where one empire had stood, called Wei, Shu, and Wu, each claiming a piece of a throne that no longer exists whole. The census takers. When there are census takers again, count what the decades of fighting actually cost. At its height, the Han Empire had held some 60 million people within its borders, a figure comparable to Rome's own population on the far side of the Silk Road neither empire ever fully crossed. By the late 3rd century, The population recorded across the three kingdoms has fallen to somewhere near 16 million. More than 7 in every 10 people are simply gone from the count, lost across decades of famine, plague, and war layered one on top of the other, rather than any single catastrophe anyone could point to and call the cause. No flood alone did this. No single battle did this. It is the slow arithmetic of every quiet fragility the Empire had been carrying for a generation, arriving all at once, uncorrected at the end. The daughter at her trays of silkworms never saw the throne, and the throne, in its way, never really saw her either. Yet the thread she wound reached further than any emperor's decree. It paid a soldier standing watch on a wall that barely stood. It settled a family's debt to a state that rarely settled its debts to them. It crossed deserts and mountain passes to drape a body in a country she had no word for, in an empire that believed her whole world was a rumor. Her hands, not the throne, were what actually reached Rome. That was the shape of it all along. Not one empire's will pressing down, but millions of ordinary hands, tending, weaving, harvesting, kneeling before a shrine at dusk, holding the whole structure up without ever being asked whether they wanted to. The men at court argued over salt and iron, over who deserved the recommended man's seat, over silk reckoned against rice. Underneath their arguments, the work continued anyway, the way it always had, the way it would keep needing to. Empires end. The thread does not entirely. It survives in a tomb far from home, in a bronze vessel that once answered an earthquake before any rider could, in a scrap of paper older than the man who claimed to invent it. What outlasts a throne is rarely the throne's own doing. The lamp by the silkworm trays has gone dark now. The mulberry leaves are put away, the wheels stilled, the road west quiet under the same stars it always kept. Let your own hands rest the way hers finally did. There is nothing left to wind tonight. Only stillness and the dark settling in, patient the way it always has.